Valentina lay on the hospital bed, exhausted, weak, yet glowing with the quiet strength of a woman who had just given birth. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her newborn child against her chest. The baby, warm, alive, breathing softly, a miracle. She had carried through months of pain, sacrifice, and silence. The room smelled of antiseptic and flowers sent by distant relatives who never truly cared. Outside the window, the city moved on, unaware that a storm was forming inside these hospital walls. Valentina believed this moment was the beginning of a new chapter. She thought motherhood would soften hearts, even those of her cold husband and his cruel family. She was wrong. The door opened without warmth, without congratulations. Her husband, Adrian, walked in first, his face stiff, eyes distant, followed by his mother and father, their expressions sharp, calculating, like predators who had waited patiently for weakness. No smiles, no tears, no joy. His mother spoke first, her voice cutting through the air like ice. "You have delivered the child. Now it is time to end this mistake." Valentina felt her heart sink. Her fingers tightened around the baby. Adrian avoided her eyes. His father stepped forward and placed a thin folder on the side table. The sound of paper hitting metal echoed louder than any scream. Divorce papers, moments after birth. No comfort, no gratitude, no respect. Valentina felt pain deeper than childbirth pain that burned through her chest. But she did not cry. She looked at the papers calmly, her mind racing through memories of insults, humiliation, forced silence, nights she spent alone while Adrian chased status and approval from his family. They believed she was nothing, a poor woman with no background, no power, no value. What they never knew was that Valentina was not just a wife. She was not just a new mother. She was the sole heir to a global investment empire, a billionaire who had stepped away from her world for love. She remembered the day she chose humility over wealth, the secret accounts the companies placed under trustees, the name she buried to build a simple life with a man she loved. Now that love stood before her as a stranger. Adrian finally spoke, his voice cold, rehearsed. "My family and I have decided this marriage brings no benefit. You will receive nothing. The child will be raised under our name." Valentina slowly lifted her eyes and met his gaze for the first time. Something changed in that moment. Not anger, not fear, but clarity. She realized this was not her end, it was her beginning. She signed the papers without hesitation, shocking them all. His mother smirked, believing victory was hers. Valentina handed the papers back, her hands steady. Then she whispered, "You have no idea what you have just done." Inside her mind, a plan awakened, a promise to her child that no one would ever look down on them again. As the family left satisfied, laughing quietly among themselves, Valentina kissed her baby's forehead and smiled, not the smile of defeat, but the smile of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. Outside the hospital room, the world still moved, unaware that karma had just been invited to the table and she would be serving it cold. The hospital room fell silent after they left. Valentina remained still for a long moment, listening to the soft breathing of her newborn, the beeping machines, the distant sounds of footsteps in the hallway. Everything felt unreal, as if time itself had paused to let her decide who she would become next. She looked down at her child and felt a surge of determination, stronger than any pain she had endured before. She remembered her past, not as regret, but as power. She had grown up surrounded by wealth, influence, strategy meetings, and numbers that moved nations. She had learned early how to read people, how to see greed behind smiles and betrayal behind polite words. She had hidden all of that when she married Adrian, choosing love over legacy, believing simplicity would bring peace. Now she understood simplicity had cost her dignity, but it would not cost her future. She reached for her phone and for the first time in years, unlocked a secure application hidden behind layers of encryption. Her real world waited on the other side. Within seconds, messages began flowing, confirmations, greetings, respect from people who still remembered her true name, her true authority. She did not respond, yet she was not ready to step back into the spotlight. She needed patience, planning, precision. The nurses entered, congratulating her, unaware of the storm She thanked them softly, the humility still part of who she was, but no longer a weakness hours later. She was discharged, no family waiting, no husband, no flowers, just a quiet ride to a small apartment she had once called home. She laid her baby in a simple crib and stood by the window, watching the city lights, thinking of Adrian and his parents. Celebrating already dividing assets, believing they had erased her from their lives, she smiled again, this time darker. Calculated, she began making calls first to her legal team sworn to secrecy, then to her financial directors, who had protected her empire during her absence. They listened in shock as she explained everything, not with tears but with authority. By nightfall, strategies were formed, investigations launched, and evidence gathered. Adrian was not the successful businessman he pretended to be. His company survived only through hidden funding that unknowingly came from subsidiaries. Valentina owned his parents' investments, loans, properties. Every thread led back to her empire. She had built a web so vast they lived comfortably inside it without ever knowing the spider she spent. Nights awake, feeding her child, planning every move. Timing was crucial. Revenge was not rage, it was chess. She registered her child's name under her true surname, securing their future. Legally, financially, socially, she documented every threat, every message, every attempt by Adrian's family to control the child. Meanwhile, Adrian grew confident, filing for custody, boasting to friends about freeing himself from a useless wife. Rumors spread about Valentina being unstable, emotional, incapable of defeat, and be capable of raising a child alone. She allowed it. Reputation could be rebuilt. Power could not be rushed. Then the first strike landed quietly. A bank froze Adrian's company accounts, citing irregularities. Suppliers pulled out contracts, vanished overnight. His parents panicked, calling contacts who suddenly refused meetings. The city buzzed with whispers of an unseen force collapsing a rising family. Adrian confronted Valentina, storming into her apartment, shouting, demanding explanations. She listened calmly. Holding her baby, her eyes unreadable, she said nothing, and that terrified him more than anger. He left shaken, unaware that this was only the beginning. Valentina stood there, composed, knowing the moment would soon come when the truth would surface, when masks would fall, and when those who humiliated her at her weakest would kneel before the woman they thought they had broken. Days passed, and the pressure on Adrian's world intensified like a tightening grip. Valentina moved with calm precision. Her routine, simple feeding, her child resting when needed, yet behind the quiet life machinery of influence turned at her command. Investigations revealed tax evasion, forged signatures, illegal asset transfers, all hidden beneath Adrian's polished image. His parents' frantic attempted damage. Control, selling properties, calling favors, but doors closed one by one because those doors belonged to Valentina. All along, the media slowly picked up the story headlines, questioned the sudden collapse of a promising business empire. Analysts confused rivals, shocked. Adrian summoned Valentina again, this time without arrogance, his voice strained, eyes hollow. He accused her of cursing his life, of ruining him. She listened, expressionless, and finally spoke, telling him truth without mercy. She revealed her identity, her wealth, her companies, the accounts that funded his success, his parents' investments built on her foundation. His knees weakened, disbelief written across his face, memories, replayed moments. He dismissed her opinions, mocked her simplicity, trusted her silence. She explained she had chosen love and humility, and he chose greed and cruelty. She told him the divorce papers were the trigger, not the cause of his downfall. His parents later arrived, uninvited, furious, demanding explanations. Valentina welcomed them with politeness that terrified them more than rage. She laid out documents, evidence undeniable, their fortunes, their homes, their status, all tied to her signature. And with one final statement, she reclaimed everything legally, ethically, and completely. Custody of her child secured, protection orders filed, and reputations exposed. Adrian begged, tears falling, promising change, but Valentina had already mourned the man she loved. The woman before them was not broken. She was awakened. She walked caring, her child knowing justice had been served. Not through screams, but through truth, power, and patience, and as the city whispered her name with new respect. Valentina stepped back into her empire not as a victim, but as a mother, a leader, and a reminder that karma never forgets those who strike. The vulnerable Valentina re-entered the world she once ruled without noise or announcement, yet the impact was immediate. Boardrooms shifted, markets reacted, and power structures realigned as if a missing force had returned to balance everything. Her presence carried authority, earned, not inherited. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. She simply appeared, and systems obeyed. Executives who once dismissed her now waited hours for meetings. Governments reopened files that had been buried for years. Investments paused, then surged when her signature appeared. She rebuilt her empire with sharper vision than before. Every move guided by motherhood, responsibility, and memory. She remembered the hospital room, the divorce papers, the cold faces, and she transformed that pain into strategy. Her companies expanded into healthcare, education, and women-led enterprises. She created funding programs for abandoned mothers, legal protection for women forced out of marriages after childbirth, and emergency medical trusts for newborns left without support. None of these acts were publicized, yet their impact spread quietly. Valentina watched from a distance as Adrian struggled to survive in a world that no longer welcomed him. His calls, when unanswered, his reputation became a liability. Former friends avoided eye contact. Investors erased his name from proposals. His parents, once proud, arrogant, now isolated, began selling possessions to maintain appearances. Valentina never interfered. She allowed consequence to teach what cruelty never could. She focused instead on her child, documenting milestones, first smiles, first sounds, first steps. Every moment reminding her why she endured, why she rose. She taught through presence, through stability, through love. The child would never know hunger, fear, or humiliation. Valentina ensured that legacy was not just wealth, but values, strength, silence, wisdom, and self-respect. And as her influence grew, so did the quiet legend of a woman who vanished for love and returned for justice. As months passed, the media attempted to uncover the source of the sudden shifts. But Valentina remained elusive, refusing interviews, declining awards, rejecting public sympathy. She understood that power, spoken too loudly, attracts envy. She preferred precision. Adrian finally wrote to her, a long letter filled with regret, memories, and desperate hope. He spoke of love, misunderstood, mistakes, family pressure, and fear of losing control. Valentina read it slowly, without anger, without satisfaction. She felt closure, not forgiveness. She understood that some doors once closed must remain that way for growth. She archived the letter and moved forward, her days filled with leadership decisions and motherhood. Nights quiet, peaceful, grounded. She created a foundation in her child's name, ensuring future generations would benefit from compassion. Born of suffering women she never met, whispered prayers of gratitude because help arrived when no one else would. And Valentina knew this was the real victory, not revenge, but transformation. She had turned betrayal into purpose, abandonment into legacy, humiliation into strength. And as she stood one evening holding her child, watching city lights below, she realized the greatest punishment for those who wronged her was not ruin, but irrelevance. They no longer mattered. Her story was no longer about them. It was about rebirth, motherhood, and a woman who reclaimed everything without ever needing to scream. Years passed and Valentina's life settled into a rhythm built on purpose, discipline, and love. Her child grew, surrounded by stability, wisdom, and quiet. Strength never once exposed to the chaos that once threatened their beginning. Valentina made sure the past remained a lesson, not a shadow. She expanded her global influence not to dominate, but to correct imbalance, investing in ethical leadership, transparent systems, and protection for women and children betrayed by power. Her name became synonymous with resilience, not scandal. Adrian faded completely. His attempts to rebuild failed not because Valentina blocked him, but because the world no longer trusted. A man who abandoned his wife at her weakest, his parents aged bitter, consumed by regret, their pride shattered by their own cruelty. Valentina never watched their downfall closely. She had outgrown the need to witness pain. She focused on legacy building schools, hospitals, innovation centers, and legal reform platforms, mentoring young women, teaching them self-worth, strategy, and independence. She taught her child that kindness was strength and silence could be louder than rage. Every night she reflected on how close she came to losing everything and how pain had shaped her into someone unbreakable. She knew that karma did not rush it, waited patiently until the moment truth was undeniable. And when it arrived, it did not scream, it simply corrected the balance of life. On the anniversary of her child's birth, Valentina returned quietly to the same hospital, not for memories but for meaning. She funded an entire maternal care wing, ensuring no woman would ever face abandonment, fear, or humiliation. After giving life, she stood anonymously watching new mothers hold their children, feeling the same mix of fear and hope she once felt, and she smiled, knowing her suffering had transformed into shelter for others. That night, she held her child and told a simple story about courage, self-respect, and knowing when to walk away. She never spoke Adrian's name because he no longer defined any chapter of her life. Valentina understood that revenge fades, but legacy endures, and the greatest victory is living fully without bitterness. She had reclaimed her empire, her dignity, and her future, but more importantly, she had reclaimed herself, and as the city slept beneath her window, she closed her eyes at peace, knowing the story that began with betrayal ended with power, purpose, and a woman who rose not to destroy, but to protect, create, and lead.